Hello everyone, welcome to the web seminar, Defeating Malware, Winning the Battle, Winning the War. Produced by Windows IT Pro and sponsored by SolarWinds MSP. Please note that this web seminar will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You'll receive an email when the session is available for review. Also, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to type them into the question box on your webcast console. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers. Nick Cavalancia has nearly 20 years of enterprise IT experience, is an accomplished consultant, speaker, trainer, writer, and columnist, and has achieved industry certifications including MCSE, MCT, Master CNE, and Master CNI. He has authored, co-authored, and contributed to over a dozen books on Microsoft technologies. Nick regularly speaks, writes, and blogs for some of the most recognized tech companies today on a variety of topics. Ian Trump, CD, CPM, BA, CEH, is security lead at SolarWinds MSP, working across all lines of business to defend, create, and execute security solutions and promote a safe, secure internet for small and medium businesses worldwide. And with that, I will hand things over to Nick Cavalancia.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. You know, whether you know it or not, we're in the middle of a war. We are. The external attack, as it were, and that's, of course, gaining access via malware, usually via phishing attacks. It's no longer this lone guy sitting in a dark room, you know, with a hoodie on where it's really dark and he's crouched over his computer. I'm thinking of like Neo in the first Matrix movie at the beginning of it, you know, something like that. It's not that guy anymore. It's these organizations that are hell-bent on trying to get inside your perimeter to either like exfiltrate data or, in the case of the MSPs on the call, maybe, you know, hold you or your client's data for ransom, you know, things like that. And given that the perimeter is no longer the firewall, it's really the user. Think about it for a second. You know, yes, you have a logical, you know, extension of your network, but your user is, they're working outside that logical perimeter of the network. They are going outside the logical perimeter of that network because they're going to websites that might be malware laden and things like that. And they're also the ones that are, when emails come in, let's say via a phishing attack that might have an attachment, you know, something like that, or a link, they're the ones that are clicking it, that are they're inviting that stuff in. So the perimeter of the network really is now the user, and considering that user isn't very interested in fighting the war with you, as it were, you know, for many organizations, this is kind of a losing battle when it comes to malware. And so the question becomes, how do you defeat an enemy that's laser focused on doing your organization in, or your customer's organization in? And so today's webcast, I'm going to cover 3 strategic areas that you should focus on and that you can actually use to defeat your adversary. It's really kind of a layered approach that I'll be covering here today. And so as always, if you've been on any of my webcasts before, if you have questions, comments, anecdotes, kind of whatever strikes your fancy during the webcast, be sure to put those in the Q&A box, and we'll try to make this as interactive a webcast as is possible. If you have something in there, maybe I can read it on, you know, while we're talking today. I'd be happy to. And so why don't we jump in? I guess the first place I'm going to kind of start with today is just the fact that, I guess I can kind of skip this title slide here. Sorry about that. And we can talk about the fact that malware today is really kind of a form of warfare. Now, I see this as being warfare because of the way that the attacks and the intent of the attacks are being made. And here's what I mean. You know, you've got these. We used to have, like, let's say, viruses. Just like, I'm thinking back, like, roll the clock back 20 years ago. I remember, like, the Jerusalem B virus. All it did was just fill up the hard drive. Ooh, that's all it did. But it was, and the whole point of building a virus back then was to, I guess, really like a pride factory, seeing, you know, the name of your virus on the web, or, you know, in newspapers or something. And it really didn't do any damage to a company necessarily. You made no money off of it. It wasn't monetized. But it was just this sort of like a harmless prank in some ways. Maybe harmless is the wrong word, but you get my point. It's kind of just a prank kind of a thing. And then we've moved, you know, forward from there into where we actually had malware that was trying to do things to your computer. And then finally someone got smart enough to say, you know, we could monetize this. We could actually, like, steal the data or hold the machine for ransom, or, you know, that kind of thing. And then you started getting into more of even an espionage type of scenario. But I think we're even worse than espionage today, which brings me kind of to the warfare scenario, where espionage, if you think about it, where we've heard about that in the news probably more like the last 2 years, you know, and you don't hear about it so much anymore these days as much. And, you know, with espionage, it's company A trying to get into company B, or government A trying to get into government B. It's very, very targeted. And yet today, we have this opponent in all of our organizations where you've got malware as a service. You've got organizations that make it their business. Just like I was just at RSA this week, and I went and saw there was, I don't know, a couple of almost 500-600 different vendors that were there. And those are software vendors and hardware vendors making solutions to protect and to secure environments, right? Well, there are organizations that are bent on their whole thing. What they're doing is they're trying to make money by building software that steals stuff from you or holds your machines for ransom or your customers' machines for ransom or your customers' data. And so it's a very strange opponent because, one, they're actually trying to go after you, but at the same time, they don't care if it's you specifically. They're doing it very opportunistically. They'll do phishing scams and just cast a wide net across many organizations. And it becomes very dangerous in that regard, because you're not sure what's going to be coming after you. You're not sure who to be looking out for. So it becomes kind of an opponent like no other. It also is an attack like no other. And there's a couple of factors here. I think the methods that we're seeing. It used to just be, I remember the very first piece of spam I ever got. And this is literally the first email I've ever got. I remember it. It was a subject line of, "Are you Bob from the chat room?" Now, today you'd go like, "Oh, that's stupid junk mail," right? You just know it. But the very first time you go, "No, I'm not Bob at all. Maybe someone got an email. Oh, they've got it screwed up." And, well, if you're not, don't worry about it. Here's a link you can click on. And that was what it was. Very simplistic method, then it was spam, probably trying to get me to look at something, or it might have even been somebody dangerous back then. This is many, many moons ago. But the methods today are far more advanced, where they're taking advantage of current events. You're taking advantage of even intel within an organization. I mean, think about this today. I can go to LinkedIn. I can go to data.com, which is part of Salesforce, or any of the other kinds of business contact information type websites, and I can even social media. And as an attacker externally, I can do a lot of intel on your organization to figure out what your organization structure is like. I can figure out who's going on vacation, if it's all public, this kind of thing. Especially if it's on Twitter, like, "Hey, I'm in the Maldives and I'm having a great old time." Perfect. The CFO's in the Maldives. I'm going to send an email and say, "Hey, I'm stuck here and I have to do this business call. Can you forward some money over to this company?" Those kinds of things. That these methods are getting far more sophisticated, which I think is actually one of my bullets here. But the methods are changing quite a bit. So is the frequency. I don't think any of us are not experiencing some kind of at least a really lame attempt, if not a good one, but at least a lame one coming in. Like I get ones from PayPal and, Dinosaur Bank. I'm making it bank names, of course, every day of some kind saying I've got to, reset something or other. And the frequency is just increasing. And as I mentioned, the sophistication is also increasing. Now you've got whaling where it's malwareless. And you've got to worry about that as well. You've got issues like where they're spoofing domain names. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides, where it looks just like a real domain name, but they've changed a character by using some extended character, like you get an I with a tilde in it instead of a regular I, and suddenly they look like Citibank.com, those kinds of things. There's really, really sophisticated methodologies here that are going on because you've got people that are realizing, if I can make this work, I can make money. And that drives people, just like it would drive you for the job that you're at. Hey, I can fix networks and I can build an architect thing. I can make money at that. I'm going to go do it, and that's why same kind of motivation. And the other thing here is devastation like no other. In this case, I see the fact that it's not just the devastation around things like, let's say they encrypt with ransomware a material portion of your files on file servers. I'm thinking this is more of a devastation like if records are stolen, businesses go under. We've seen this far too often. There was a stat, I'm going to get it wrong too. It was something like 61% of businesses that have a data breach go under within 2 years. That's wrong. The number's wrong, but it's something material like that. And I can't remember what it was. It just came out. It was from Ponymon, a Ponymon study about a year ago. But it was something along those lines where it's just like because big businesses like a Yahoo, yeah, they can survive a data breach. They're big and they have a lot of cash. But smaller organizations where they suddenly have one, and the bad news, customers don't trust them anymore. That's a huge amount of devastation. It's from your standpoint, your customer standpoint, if you're an MSP, it's not about so much the breach as much as it is about the effect afterward and what's going to happen to their organization, their reputation, that kind of thing. And so what you really need to have here in order to kind of work against this warfare is a layered defense strategy. Think about even a castle. I was in France 2 summers ago, and had the opportunity to walk through a bunch of chateaus, which in essence are castles in a lot of ways. Some of them are just big buildings, but some of them are really more like castles, and you got to see a layered defense strategy. You saw the kill ports, where someone who's an archer could sit there and they could shoot in a bunch of like 120-degree angles around. They could get it. They had different levels, and I mean different ways of putting moats in place. And you could see the defense strategies that these were places to live, just like your organization is a living, breathing, kind of organism, if you will. But they were also places that were used to defend, so that if an attacker came, those inside would remain secure and protected. And so I want to talk about this layered defense strategy, and I want to do this by kind of looking at 3 different parts. The first one is the area of, if I get the slide up, here we go, prevention. And obviously the first thing you want to do is make sure it never happens in the first place. And the way to do that, and what I really want to focus on is not so much, I'm not going to spend my slide time here focusing on just trying to exacerbate the problem and just tell you it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. I'm trying to spend most of my time talking about the things that you need to have in place in order to try to thwart an attacker's efforts. So when we talk about prevention, the best way to figure out what should I be preventing, what kind of solution should I be putting in place that's going to prevent, there's actually a number of different things you put in place proactively. And the way to do it is to follow the path of an attack. It's almost like looking at the kill chain of a data breach. In this case, we're just talking about the kill chain of an attack and looking at the things that that an attacker will do, and try to, at each of those levels, each of those steps, put something in place. It's a layered defense strategy. I'm going to name a lot of things that represent, in essence, lots of different solutions, and you're going to say, holy crap, Nick, that's really expensive what you're talking about. I recognize that, and the hope here is that, one, in some cases you can do some of these things yourself because you can, and I'll try and point some of that out. And in other cases, you might want to get a third-party solution, sure. But in other cases, it's more of I'm going to try and put in as many defense layers as I can, but not so much. You may not be able to do all of them, and that's okay. But put something in place, and don't think of this as just being, if I just put, anti-malware, I'm just picking anything randomly, just one solution in place, that's going to cover it. It's not. And there's some really good data behind that I'll share with you in a couple of minutes here that kind of makes the point that not having a layered strategy is actually worse for you. And so you want to follow the plan of attacks. I'm going to kind of put a grid up here looking at the attack methods and then the prevention methods that you can put in place in order to kind of figure out what you need to put in your particular defense strategy for either your organization or your customers' organizations if you're an MSP listening. So the first part of the attack method is the issue of phishing. I think it was PhishMe just came out with a stat a little bit ago. It was 91% of attacks start with phishing. And so, I'm assuming everyone's familiar with it, but just to cover our bases, for the 0.001 of us that don't know what phishing is, it's an email-based attack. There's also spear phishing, which is a targeted email-based attack at one organization or a set of organizations, maybe a particular industry, vertical, that kind of thing, where you're trying to get somebody to click an attachment, click a link that's got connects to a malware-laden website. But in essence, it starts with a phishing attack via email in a lot of cases. And the prevention methods here are utilizing email security. In this case, it's solutions that are going to be put in place. Usually it's like an SMTP proxy where email will first come into an email security platform. They'll do a bunch of scanning. They'll even take attachments and try to open them up in a virtual sandbox and things like that. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes here. And they will try to detect and figure out if they can stop it from ever happening before it ever gets to the user. So there's that aspect. So from phishing standpoint, you try to make sure the things that are evil within the phishing email, that's the stuff you care about, not the email itself. Email security hopefully can take care of that. The other one is phishing testing and training. And this is ongoing, continual phishing testing and training. This means you're utilizing solutions. There are a couple of companies out here that do this. And they will do continual training of users where you have online training people take. You tell them about the latest threats, things like that, and then you do phish testing where within the organization you send emails yourself from a solution, and it reports on the results. So that way you can start focusing in on which parts of your organization are people going, the people in accounting, they just keep clicking these phish emails over and over and over again. They're not getting it. Now you know where to focus. See, it helps you at least figure out where in your organization you're the most weak and where your risk is greatest. So kind of think that way. Now, the phishing attacks could have attachments. I'll talk about a little bit about how we get past attachments and we thwart them a little bit in the detection section of this presentation here. But in other times, the emails will have malware-laden website links. And so these are websites that already have either low levels of security, someone's taken them over, or it could just be a website that someone's trying to spoof to make it look like it's, let's say, PayPal, but in actuality it's their own website with some malware there that's going to try to take advantage of, let's say, a vulnerability in Java or something like that. And so the way to get past those is, again, some user training around clicking links. That's a big one because, again, your users are your perimeter. You've got to make sure they're trained. But there's also an aspect of having endpoint security in place. So with endpoint security, what I mean is application whitelisting, blacklisting specifically. That way, there are certain applications that are allowed to run, and if someone does go to a malware-laden website and something tries to get downloaded and the user just goes, yeah, sure, go ahead and install it. When it tries to run, your app whitelisting, blacklisting would say, no, that's not on the list. No, I don't think so. And it stops it in its tracks. You can do that with a little bit of group policies. There's at a basic level, you can get that accomplished. So kind of keep that in mind. And so far of the things that I've talked about, you do have at least user training, endpoint security. You can do some of that yourself. The email security and the phishing testing and training, probably more like third-party solutions. But again, I'm trying to give you a wider range of gamut of what you can do on your own and what you can't. And then the other one here is, if someone is successful with a phishing attack and someone clicks the link to a malware-related website and then someone that causes some JavaScript code to run, they're going to be trying to take advantage of, let's say, a known vulnerability in Java, as the case might be, or maybe it's in Adobe Flash, or whatever the case is. And so this just comes down to making sure that you've got all your operating systems and applications patched. Now, with this one, you're rolling your eyes. Nick, really, you're going to talk about patching? You keep in mind with a couple of the last Verizon Data Breach Investigations reports that came out, there was a stat, I think it's in the 2015 report, which I know we're now in 2017, got it, but I just want to reference this. It was something like, I want to say it was about 90 to 95% of the threats that were successfully came in through known vulnerabilities were vulnerabilities that had been patched over a year prior. So what I mean by all of those words is to say, every time that a threat came in, according to that particular report, that was due to a known vulnerability, that vulnerability has been documented and had a patch for it a year ago, and people were still getting in through it. So the reality is, if you aren't 100% certain that you're patched, it might be worth looking at a solution that not just does patching, but maybe even does risk intelligence, as an example, where you're looking to see where your data resides in your organization and then your patch statuses of those machines and putting that data together. And that way you can figure out how likely it is that those machines are going to be vulnerable, and you can try to, of course, address it with patching and things like that, because you've got to make sure if you're not certain, you're not patched. That just really comes down to that much. So all of this is meant to be proactive. Let's do it before it ever happens. But the assumption has to be that even though you've got the prevention in place, you must take the standpoint that they're going to get through this. They're going to get through this layer of defense. Just like if, going back to my example when I was in France and I would see one of these castles, they had the outer defense and they had the walls and they had ways where they were going to set up and they could shoot arrows and stuff at people on the outside. And I remember this one in a city called Angers. And by the way, best hamburger in Angers. It's called the Mac Duchesse. If you ever go to Angers, there's a little cafe that go. It's amazing. It's the best hamburger on the planet. Anyways, I digress. So in Angers, this castle, they had another castle, a little mini castle that was like the place they retreated to, way up on a hill. Again, hill, higher up, better attack vector in case there are defense vector if they're trying to ward off some attackers that get through the initial wall. They had a second layer of defense where everyone could at least revert back to that second position and stay there, and they would try and fend off their attackers. And so even they would design these castles in a way that was, well, we're going to assume that this one defense isn't going to do it, so what else should we do? And I want you to do the same thing every time. So the next layer is going to be detection. Again, assuming that all the prevention methods you put in place, you're still going to have something that kind of gets through, and how do we detect? So again, as I put in here, you got to assume that the prevention is going to fail to some degree, and the reality here is you're probably not going to be able to do this on your own. You're going to need a third-party solution, and because detection comes itself in many, many flavors. There's a lot of ways to do detection of malware. Nothing you can really do on your own. And so in some ways I look at this as being a layered defense within your layered defense. And here's what I mean. Look at all of these different ways that detection can be done for malware. You're already familiar with things like signature-based and probably heuristic-based, where those are even back from the old antivirus days and that sort of thing. But you also have things like, let's say, domain spoofing, where people try to pretend they're a domain. They could even be a domain that just got registered an hour ago. And you have solutions that will actually look to see if they're trying to be a domain, or if it's I get one character off, they have a 1 instead of an I, or a 0 instead of an O, those kinds of things. Or if the domain just got created an hour and a half ago and then they're trying to send an email, things like that. Scanning the content, literally looking for types of words in there that says like your password needs to be verified or your account information, those kinds of things, and you flag that. Attachment scanning, looking through the attachments. Again, that kind of goes back to heuristics and signature-based scanning of the attachments. But there's also things like attachment rewriting. This is a great solution where if something is, let's say, a Word doc, and you're worried about, let's say, a macro inside the Word doc that would then, it gets really sophisticated. You can have a Word doc that gets open where the macro then downloads something and that has a JavaScript code in it that takes advantage of a vulnerability in Java, and then they finally get access to your machine. That's how sophisticated it can get. So attachment rewriting would say, anytime a Word doc comes down, we're going to turn it into a PDF. And there, now macros are gone because it's PDF, that sort of thing. Attachment sandboxing is another one, where you create a virtual environment and you detonate the attachment, meaning you run it, you open it, you do whatever, and you let it take its course, and it does its thing, and it gets watched in the sandbox and says, well, nothing happened. Okay, cool, this one's good. Or something did happen. We're going to have to keep it quarantined and tell the person they're not going to get it, as the case might be. And then impersonation checks, just making sure if it says it's someone from within the organization, is it actually coming from them through IP addresses, domains being used, things like that. So there's a lot around detection that comes into play where you need a solution. And I put all of these up here because I want you thinking in terms of, I'm not just going to get, let's say, antivirus. I'm going to get anti-malware. I'm going to get something that has a layered approach in and of itself so that I know that there are many, many ways. Some of you might even have email up in Office 365, as the case may be. And Microsoft, of course, has their own malware prevention. But even so, that's one way of doing it. The reality is I would always tell any of my customers, you want to have a couple of ways. You want a different set of people, meaning a different organization, a different solution. You want a different set of people who think about approaching the problem differently on this particular issue, because this is warfare. So I want to have a layered defense where I've got someone who's really good at digging moats and can dig the best moats and knows how to keep people out and put traps and alligators and stuff in. Great, get the moat person. Perfect. But then you want to get the person who knows how to design the openings and where to put the openings on a castle wall. And their idea of how they're going to prevent people from coming in is very different from the moat person. See, it's a layered defense, layered approach, difference in the way that they're trying to deal with the problem. And that's the same way that you want to deal with this here. So again, we've gone through prevention. So we've got all these great solutions up in place that are saying stop to all the malware. No malware is going to come in, none of it. But just in case it does, we're going to detect. That's where we're at now. We're going to detect, and then we're going to stop it. When we detect it, it's going to stop. We know it's not going to come in anymore. But again, you have to assume that even detection and prevention is going to fail. And so you've got to think about recovery. And recovery doesn't just mean like backup. So you'll see what I mean here in a moment here. But this third part is, how do you recover from this? Now, a couple of stats here I want to throw out at you. There was a great report on ransomware that KnowBe4 just put out. They're one of the people that do phishing testing and training, and I happen to write it for them. So I'm very familiar with this data, and it's a great piece of information. And one of the things they found when it came to ransomware, just as an example of malware, but because it's the same thing, just has a different kind of approach. But 33% of all organizations were victims in 2016. So in the last 12 months, 33% of every organization that they surveyed was a victim. And by the way, that number gets even worse when you're looking at the smaller organizations, because the companies that were from like 1 to 50, 88% of them experienced at least one ransomware attack. And they're 51 to 100. I'm looking at the stats here real quick. 79% for 51 to 100, 65% of 100 to 500 seats, 47% of 501 to 1,000 seats. Everybody. And on the average, it was 33%. You're talking about these are people that are all experiencing it on every size. And The other thing here is that what's interesting is that of those organizations, they actually have things like security software that filters out ransomware, and they have training, and they have security videos and emails they send out to their users. They have phishing testing, and I mean, they have all of this stuff in place. Endpoint security. They have all kinds of a layered approach, and yet they're still seeing ransomware coming in. And this is really, it's a statistically relevant sample size. I think it was 500 or 600 organizations, if I remember correctly. And we even went through on this thing naming like the major antivirus solutions to say, is that enough? And even those people still had. You can name anyone you want. I'm not going to name names, but anyone you want, you can read the report yourself. But even the biggest names you can think of still had ransomware attacks. So the idea here is it's going to get past your prevention. It's going to get past your detection. Something's going to get in, because remember, your opponent is someone who is hell-bent on figuring out a new way to get past whatever it is that you've put in place, because that's their job. I mean, literally, there are companies in Russia today and in Eastern Bloc countries today where they have like, you make a salary and you talk by the water cooler with your friends, and you have quarterly business review meetings with the board of directors, and you're trying to increase your revenue year over year. I mean, this is a company that is trying to steal money from other people, and they're running like a regular organization. Got to kind of think that in mind. All right, so you have to have a proactive data protection planning approach to this, and there's two parts here. You got to think about the endpoints, and you've also got to think about the data. So this is a little bit about just backups and recovery, but there's a little bit more than that as well. So you do not have a proactive data protection planning approach for each of these, because if I have something like, if I have malware affects an endpoint, you might be able to remove it, you might not. And you got to think about, well, how am I going to recover that endpoint? Some organizations simply have a golden image, and they just go ahead and re-image the machine, and you're good to go. Maybe have some desktop management software that puts the applications and configuration settings back on. Cool. Then you have a plan for your endpoints. Others might have virtual desktops. That's even better. Then you just spin up a virtual desktop, or you revert back to an old snapshot. Whatever. That's fine. Cool. But at least you have something for the endpoint itself. And then for the data, you've got to think about the data on the endpoint, if there is any, that's relevant. And that, again, goes back to when you're looking at risk intelligence type products, where they're looking at where your sensitive data types, like credit cards and personnel information, social security numbers, all that stuff, might be on an endpoint itself, especially if it's a laptop. You want to know that you have a way to either recover that data, or that really data shouldn't be there, but it is what it is, because people do take that stuff that way and try to use it when they're out, remotely working from the office. But you also be able to recover not just data on the endpoint, like a laptop or a desktop, but remember that some malware is so sophisticated that it will look to see what SMB connections you have, or even ones that are cached in memory still, and we'll try to reconnect those to other servers. And so they'll connect to the F drive and the J drive and the Q drive, as it were, and try to encrypt that data, if in the case of ransomware. And so you're trying to have a way of making sure that any data that's accessible by any user, which in essence is all your file servers and all your endpoints, really kind of comes down to, at least at this point, I haven't heard of any malware that's sophisticated enough to go, let's say, after SharePoint data or something like that. But it's at least file data, you need to have something in place that allows you, a way to recover that data. Chris mentions here from EFS, it's such a huge topic, you need a team for all of this, and you're absolutely right, you do. In some ways, in large organizations, you're going to have to think about a team that's worried about the defenses, someone that's going to worry about incident response, someone that's worried about data protection, someone's going to worry about the recovery process. I totally agree. In a small organization, having an MSP is probably a good choice, because you've got an organization that's focused on technology and nothing else, as opposed to having the single headcount person in the office who's responsible for doing that. Oh, and also installing Office. It's kind of hard to. I'm going to protect the company. I'm doing like a Captain America hands or a Peter Pan hands in my waist. I'm going to protect the company kind of pose. And while I'm busy trying to get your printer installed and then upgrade your Office to the latest version, it's not going to happen. It is a much more of a team effort. So you're absolutely right, Chris. I think in addition to a data protection planning, you also need to have a response plan. And This is something that is sort of done proactively because you're going to have a response plan. It means you have it before you have to respond, right? Okay. And so there's a couple aspects to this. The first one is, of course, the data recovery. It ties in. So that first, or I guess the second bullet and subset bullets fits in here. You need to have a way of when there's an issue, when there's an incident, how are we going to respond? And we need to have a data recovery plan so we know how we're going to do it so we can get back up and running as quickly as possible. Even if it's just malware infecting a machine, just like when a virus would infect the machine. It could be the malware that just says, hey, your machine needs to be fixed and you need to call this phone number and give us $400 so we can, fix the machine. It's one of those scams, that they say they're Microsoft or whatever, one of those things. You still have to wipe that machine somehow. You got to get all that stuff off there and be certain it's completely off. And so, Andrew says, I hate doing the Captain America. It's what's driving me nuts right now. I'm the one-stop shop for everything. Sorry, man. I'm with you. I was there too, the entire guy. So data recovery is the first one here. I got to get back to this so I can get done and make sure Ian has time to talk here. There's also an issue of root cause analysis. And what I mean by this is you might have a series of machines that are infected. You might also have an actual cyber attack going on where someone's got a foothold in your organization and they're spreading out throughout the organization by trying to access credentials that are cached in memory using a tool like Mimikatz or something, and then getting those cached credentials, jumping to another machine, infecting each of those so they get a foothold and they can run in stealth. There needs to be a plan here around root cause analysis to figure out where is this coming from. Some of the endpoint protection solutions will do that. But in some cases, hopefully if you've got a good detection strategy, you can nip this in the bud where just one machine is infected, and hopefully that would be where you can at least try and get something accomplished. There's also security awareness training, which kind of goes and ties it with that phishing training and testing, but making people aware that this is an issue, making people aware of the fact that this costs the organization. That user will not get their work done. Those kinds of things. Making people aware of that. These kinds of trainings go on, but not so much. Everything from what I've heard from companies that do the training, they're saying the hey, let's have everyone come in the break room for lunch, or we're just going to tell them once a month. That sort of doesn't work. It's got to be something where it's more. You're either trying to make it fun. Where maybe it's a video of some kind, something that's kind of engaging maybe. Maybe it's I don't know how to make it fun. I don't know how to make malware fun. We put the fun in malware. I'm not sure how that works, but whatever. But it's something where it's either that or it's continual, where at least the mindset is we're very serious about this. You've got to be aware of this. Don't click on anything that you shouldn't be clicking on, and so on. I remember one time seeing an email that came in. A story about an email that came into an organization where the person had hacked the metadata on the executable and made it look like a PDF. And they changed the file name from, let's just say it's called malware.exe, right, for the sake of argument. They changed it to, I'm going to use current year, even though this was a couple years ago, the revised 2017 holiday calendar .pdf space, million spaces, .exe. So put this in context. You get an email spoofed from your head of HR, successfully spoofed. It looks like it's coming from, Jim Jones, the head of HR at your company. And Jim says, hey, we added 2 days to the holiday calendar this year. You're going to get 2 extra days off this year. Tell me that even you guys aren't going to click on that PDF. Of course you are. I want 2 more days off, don't you? Yeah. And so, that being the case, you would fall for that. And so that's why I think security awareness training has to be put in play, where you've at least got to. Now, in that particular instance, I don't think security awareness training is going to help. That's a really good sneaky one, because everybody's going to click that one because we all want 2 more days off. But you get the point. You've got to make people aware of anything that looks fishy, anything that doesn't look like it lines up. You got to be kind of, every time you open an email from anybody inside or outside the organization, and put people's mindsets in place so they understand what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to email and phishing and malware and so on. And then the last one here is a review of your prevention and your detection methodologies, because the enemy, remember, they're in an organization. They're like a software company, just like the good guys. I went to RSA. You've been to trade shows before. Pick any trade show you went to and think of one of the booths that you attended that you loved their product. Okay. Now pretend that there's like the Bizarro world. That's what it is. It's the Bizarro RSA. If you went to Bizarro RSA, it would be 500 vendors that all have malware and they have, hacking tools, and it's all the ways you can break into companies. That's pretty funny, actually. I like that. That's going to be my next theme, I think, is Bizarro World. I don't know how I'm going to make that work, but you get my point now, I think. And they're working constantly. They're improving their game, just like the vendors at whatever trade show you've been to, and that vendor that I said that you remember you stood at their booth and thought their stuff was cool. They're trying to improve their stuff every year, aren't they? So are the bad guys. And so you've got to review your prevention and detection methodology. You cannot say, okay, I put it in and I'm good. I'm doing my Captain America pose again. I'm good. I've got everything in place. We are secure officially. Final answer. No, you're not. So kind of keep that in mind here. So Dennis is asking, how do you get upper management to buy into this? So they'll settle for external advice from a company that buys them the best lunch. I find that for some reason when I was a consultant, I had an MSP organization and I had an enterprise consultancy type architect type of firm. And it always seemed like upper management was more willing to listen to a consultant than their internal folks. I don't know why. I completely agree with you, Dennis. I don't know why they do that. It's very strange. Maybe they're just looking for someone that's seen more in the industry than the person who's just working at their company has only seen what their company is doing. I don't entirely get it because I think that you're probably, since you're on webinars like this, you are equally as aware as I am because I've conveyed everything that I know to you. But I'm with you there on that one. So let me do this. I'm going to sum this up and hand things over to Ian so Ian can have a little bit of time here. The goal here is to win this war. That's what you want. You want to make sure that you're winning the war no matter what. And so first you have to just at least recognize with me that your organization is under attack. This is an attack. This is warfare. This is not just like, once in a while someone's going to try and do something. These are people that are, I use the words hell-bent on purpose. They are hell-bent on trying to figure out how to just steal money from you as best they can. That's how they make their living. That's how they make their quarterly bonuses, is based on how much money of yours they steal. Think about that. That's bizarre. It's so strange, but it's true. All right, so the next part here is just the fact that the malware itself, given all of the different methodologies that it uses, the sophistication that it uses, it's worthy of a layered defense. When you go back to my example of the Word doc that has the macro that then downloads the code that then launches as a script that goes and tries to take advantage of a Java vulnerability that finally downloads the malware that's going to be the payload that gets installed in your machine and allows the person to have persistence. That's sophistication, man. That's a lot of dedication. They put a lot of work into that. You need a layered defense for that because you might not stop the macro, but maybe you need to at least be patched for the Java. See, now I've got a layered defense, and I got two things in place, and I at least stopped it at one. That sort of thing. And you got to think about this: that prevention is what you're trying to go for, and it's almost like prevention is greater than detection is greater than recovery, because you want to prevent in the first place as best you can. If you can't, then detect, and if you can't, then you recover. And then the last one here is just that reminder that I kind of put throughout. You have to assume that the previous layer is going to fail. Never think that because you did it, it's good enough. Just assume literally that they're going to get through, but not to the point where you're like, screw it, I'm just going to let them in. Not that bad, but to the point where you're going, I have to put a layered defense in. I can't just put one defense in and assume that that's good enough. So I hope this was helpful. If you've got some questions here, make sure you put those, put them into the Q&A box. And we'll be happy to answer those questions when Ian's done here. And with that, Ian, I will hand things over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. And I think a lot of great information in your slides, and just kind of your overview and sense of the war that is being fought right now for a lot of the folks that are out there. So we're going to change tactics a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the enemy, talk a little bit about what folks are faced with, and I think it's probably safe to say that it's getting increasingly difficult for the defender. I think we've seen in the last little while a big increase in the sophistication of the threat, as Nick said. The ability of folks to get their malware onto your endpoints doesn't look like it's being mitigated. And I'm also here at RSA, and I'm really seeing the whole big picture, which is the antivirus vendors, specifically a lot of the traditional ones, are saying, okay, trust us this time. We have it this time. Unfortunately, it seems like there's a incredible amount of fail. What I'm putting up on the screen is just to give some perspective right now on this situation. We can expect the security industry to grow to 170 billion from 75 billion in 2015 in terms of growth. The problem, in a nutshell, is the bad guys are going to do $2 trillion of harm in 2019. When you think about the entire value chain that's predicted as a result of the internet, we're talking about 5.8 trillion. So we're talking a little bit about almost 50 cents of every dollar that's made online is going to be robbed. It's going to be taken by the bad guys. So we have a huge problem on that end of the spectrum. The other issue, too, is this fight is not being fought in the large enterprise organizations. The small, medium enterprises, small, medium businesses are truly the ones that are being victimized by this. So this is where, you know, the rubber hits the road and all of those other coin expressions is that small, medium enterprises and those MSPs that service them are getting a huge wake-up call in that what they're trying to do and trying to find is that those customers are having difficulty understanding why they need to do security. So they get the excuses of, we're too small to be appealing. Not true. Every customer out there has a payroll system, it has customer information, it has employee information. All of that is worth something to the bad guys. So if you're going into a business or you're talking as the IT security problem, number one thing to talk about is the safeguarding of employee information and customer information. And in fact, in many of the states and regulated industries, it's a legal requirement. It's not really an issue now about whether or not it should be done. I believe the word we're looking for is it shall be done. So the issues of we're too small or we don't have anything worth stealing are completely not even tenable. The other issue is we have nothing to lose. This is really interesting, and as Nick pointed out, the bad guys are very much capable of ending that small, medium enterprise business. So this is something that I think Nick's presentation of what I'm talking about is really going to be pertinent to those businesses. You know, one of the last sort of stats, and I always like to put a bunch of the stats into the presentation, mostly so that when you download the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to get some of the information that I work with and I research. This is the really interesting part, that insecure firms stand to lose a large amount of business. 66% of consumers are unlikely to do business with organizations that expose their customer data. And customers right now believe 70% of the responsibility for protecting personal data lies with the company. So if you are falling down in that particular regard, this is a business problem, a risk management problem, and something that will hit the bottom line solidly. So the question becomes is, what are some of the steps that we need to take? And I am delighted to introduce to you the ebook, which is available from the Resources tab, called Indications of Compromise. And Indications of Compromise is really an effort on my part, as well as some really great graphic design people at SolarWinds MSP, to talk about the relationship between the exploit, the Trojan, and the payload. So these are the components, if you will, that make up a modern day attack. And I mean, we like to call it ransomware, but ransomware is really, actually, when you think about it, it's the outcome of a whole bunch of things that just went tragically wrong in your security envelope. So as a teaching aid, and it will be in the downloadable PDF that we will make available at the end of this webinar, we take a look at the Lockheed Martin kill chain, and we focus on the last 5 parts of the kill chain. And what we're attempting to do here is we're really trying to talk about how malware makes its way from the outside of the network, through the network, onto the endpoint, has some sort of interaction, then has to call out from the network back and finally get some information about what it's supposed to do now that it's successfully infected that particular endpoint. Understanding this is a key in doing two things for your business. The first is understanding what protection works at what stage of this infection. And as an MSP, this allows you to counter some of the arguments of, well, we have antivirus and we have a firewall and that should be good enough. So this is really about understanding how the threat actually works, as opposed to sort of what the industry has been saying for a very long time, that basically buy our product and we guarantee that you'll be safe. And that is just not the case. And I think, you know, being on the ground here at RSA, there is an awful lot of I'm going to say, an awful lot of boasting and not a lot of hubris in the fact that ransomware has plagued the small and medium business for quite some time now. So these two graphs, again, are excerpts from the efforts and work of the SolarWinds MSP graphic design team. We talk about the vectors of attack and we talk about the exploitations. And as you can see, on the vectors, it is email and web links that are causing the majority of our attacks today. So the defense, of course, has to focus on that. When you look at the software vulnerabilities that are being exploited, you can see that Adobe Flash and Oracle Java are at the top of those lists. Now, it's very difficult to live in a Java-free world, but again, what you can do is look at those business functions and understand what you can do to mitigate or remove the attack surface. You may have some people that need Java because they have an application that's dependent on it. That can be, everybody needs that software. And that's really what it comes down to. So if you want to harden your defenses, start thinking about removing the vulnerable software from the environment. Now, one of the things that we have to understand is when the bad guys get a foothold in the network, they're, depending on the sophistication of the adversary and depending on what their end goal is. So for instance, if it's the theft of intellectual property or the theft of incriminating information, like which may be contained in a law firm. Recently there was that attack where Chinese hackers broke into law firms to steal information regarding merger and acquisition activity and then gained the stock market. So it really depends on what you're trying to defend against. But there's something we have to talk about that is a real win on both sides of the fence, and that is segmenting networks and preventing lateral movement. The key here is to ensure that you have built a cyber mousetrap that prevents the bad guys from having free reign of the network. And one of the ways you can do this is being very explicit at the firewall and in the internal network segmentation about what can talk to what. There was recently that big hack in the news that showed that printers on the internet were highly vulnerable to an attack. So these are some of the things that are simple to do, a relatively quick win for your organization, but a great way to harden your defenses so that if you do get something like ransomware breaking out in your organization, it is contained to perhaps some systems as opposed to being able to run afoul of your entire network, okay? Now, again, the idea here is that combinations of network segmentation and understanding of the kill chain analysis gives you those several chances to avoid a security incident. Unfortunately, this is why we need the layered defense, because the tech stack, the technical stack that we've thrown in front of the bad guys doesn't do particularly well. Check out these statistics here where 77% of respondents said that the attack bypassed their email filtering solutions. 95% bypassed the firewall, 52% bypassed the anti-malware solution installed on the endpoint. And even though you had some user awareness training, it only seems to work about 33% of the time. This slide is a little bit hard to understand, but those bracketed numbers with the 23%, 5%, 48%, 33%, are the chances that that security technology in this study actually worked against the thing. So this is why we talk about the layered security, because what we're doing is we're essentially making it more likely to detect malicious activity with more chances of technology. So it's a great way to understand why we need more than one, right? Now, there is some controversy in the issues around ransomware, and even here at RSA, the panel is somewhat divided. There are times when you may have to pay the ransom to get operational systems back. One of the things that you need to understand is that if ransomware has broken out in your organization, you do have a security hole that needs to be plugged. So that is one thing. But keep in mind, if you have, a whole bunch of data that is not securely backed up, then, you may be quite failing as an MSP or an IT provider, and that's something you need to immediately look into. So the answer is actually pretty straightforward. And in the UK, at least, they have a pretty comprehensive program to help MSPs and IT SMBs understand what they need to do in order to be cyber secure. And the governments of both the United States and the UK have come up with a pretty straightforward, layered defensive strategy that aligns with the indications of compromise download that we've talked about. Essentially, what it's calling for is a number of different technologies, a number of different things that you can do in order to make it harder for the bad guys to get onto those endpoints. So malware protection, network security, secure configurations by default. In fact, one outspoken IT security leading figure has suggested we wouldn't even have an IT security problem if we just practiced secure configurations by default. Interesting thoughts. Managing user privileges and securing the home, mobile, and personal devices becomes increasingly important as the perimeter of our defense is really at the end of our boots now. The reality is that you can do your work from almost anywhere, and in that mobility comes a security concern. And of course, with the rise of insider threats and the tremendous amount of damage that can be done, securing removable media and managing removable media becomes certainly an area to focus on. Finally, monitoring and the collection of activity logs is twofold importance. The first part is you can go back in time if you have all the log activity to find out what failed of your defense. How did the bad guys arrive? How did they land on your endpoint? So I think that's a really important aspect, is that out of all of these security technologies, really only log management and security incident event managers can go back in time to see what failed. More importantly, by having monitoring and those logs, you now are proving due diligence. And in this era of compliance issues and things like that, log management is becoming a real focus for organizations. Now, one of the things that I always like to talk about a little bit is the security awareness training. Security awareness training is actually based on the assumption that the technology will fail. And in fact, we have lots of data to suggest that the technology is failing. It truly provides an extra layer of defense, but the cool thing about this is user security training that gets users to buy in that this training is not just about their work. It's about being cyber secure at home, cyber secure when they're in transit and traveling, and then cyber secure at work. So you really have now 3 areas that you're focusing your training on. It also is a must-have for many compliances, including the General Data Protection Regulation that will be coming into force in 2018 in European countries and the UK. But more importantly, when you look at PCI DSS or SOX or any of your ISO frameworks like 27001 or COBIT or SANS critical controls, user awareness training becomes a part of your layered defensive strategy. I always like to leave folks thinking about what the most important aspect is to their customers and to their business, and it is the data. You must back up the data, not simply because it's the way of responding to ransomware attacks, but because other accidents happen. It could be a provider, it could be yourself having a bad day, it could be a natural disaster. We've seen many places in the United States and overseas come under all sorts of different types of disasters, ranging from earthquakes to hurricanes. All of this requires a robust backup, and I truly believe that a backup locally and a backup in the cloud is probably the best way to go so that you can have that hybrid backup solution to protect data. So I know that was a whirlwind tour. I do want to kind of leave some time now for questions and answers from myself and from Nick and other members of the team that are on this call. Truly think that, you know, it was my privilege to introduce to you our newest ebook, The Indications of Compromise, which you are the premier audience to get, and we'll certainly have lots to talk about in the Q&A section.
All right, thank you, Ian. If anyone has any questions for Nick or Ian, please type them into the question box on your screen. I see we already have a few, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, first question, any thoughts on non-persistent virtual desktops?
So great, it's a great tactic if you can do it. It is sometimes difficult because of all the difficulty there is in getting your applications to work properly. One of the biggest challenges with non-persistent environments is the fact that the users will make customizations and they will make adjustments to the own way they like to work, and that then becomes a bit of a problem if everything sets back to default or the defaults they're not comfortable with. In this era of diversity in terms of the workplace, some people may require bigger fonts or additional software in order to function. So non-persistent virtual desktops work in specific business cases. I could see it being perfect for something like a point-of-sale device where there really is only one function that device is supposed to be accomplishing. Unfortunately, when you start talking about different applications, you now get a layer of complexity because of those requirements. But in terms of security, it's great if you can reset everything back to the original. It certainly makes it more difficult for the attackers to get a persistent foothold.
I think the other aspect of this is to keep in mind with a non-persistent desktop that you're helping with the aspect of, let's say if you took the three areas that I talked about, sort of the prevention, the detection, and the recovery, you're helping with the recovery side of things because you can quickly recover, just shut it down and start a new one up. Cool. But that doesn't necessarily address the prevention or the detection aspects of protecting the environment. So kind of keep that in mind as well.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. Next question. We've been seeing a rash of remote desktop breaches lately, hackers guessing simple user passwords. There seems to be a new hacking tool that's making brute force attacks on RDP easier.
Absolutely there is. The cyber criminals are using cloud, Hadoop, map reduction to do those type of brute force attacks and SQL injection attacks. And because of these large-scale breaches of 200 or 250 million passwords, we're in a situation where all of those passwords and user IDs are being used in what's called the password replay attack, or account compromise at one point leads to now that remote desktop brute force. One of the easiest ways to prevent this is really to look at a two-factor authentication capability in front of it. It pretty much shuts down the brute force attack attempts, especially on exposed services like that. Or if you have particular geographies that you're supporting with remote desktop, again, a firewall rule to block traffic from all other subnets except for a few known subnets is another stopgap measure that you can do.
All right, great. Thank you. Next question. I know that there's no magic bullet, but what comes closest to being the magic bullet?
Wow.
How about not being on the internet and reading your email with a Palm Pilot? That's what I would say.
You know, Nick, I think you do hit the nail on the head. Reduce your exposure to the bare minimum. When I've gone into companies that are running flat networks and found production machines that make the money for the business, you know, being able to surf YouTube and having full access to the internet, I just shake my head, because if they lose those devices, they will not be able to make the widgets come out the end of the factory. So I think, you know, Nick's initial approach was, you know, get this stuff off the internet if it's absolutely critical, or at least protect it adequately.
All right, great. We'll take one more. What kind of logging forensics can we bring in to see who clicked on the email link that brought in the ransomware?
Well, absolutely. You can certainly do it at a number of different layers. Any sort of mail protection, mail scrubbing application will do it. Barracuda will do it. You can get into SIM and log management that will tell you about user activities, and I'm going to say more expensive solutions like Splunk or Alert Logic will all give you that chain of activity. I think it's important to understand, though, is that you're not trying to kill the user that clicked on the email link, and even though you might be able to attribute it to a particular user in your environment, they are going to feel like crap for doing what they already did, okay? There's no need for IT to jump up and down on their heads. What IT needs to do is respond with kindness, training, and to help the business move beyond the incident. And I know that might be a little bit, let's all hug it out, but to be honest here, the people are the most important part of the business. And because people will make a mistake, you know, we have to look at the broader context of their contributions. And I think that's, you know, the big takeaway is you may very well know who did it, but, you know, now's not the time to tie them to the stake and set them on fire.
The other thing I just added this real quick is the other types of solutions that would be able to let you see, you know, who clicked the email link specifically. There are user activity monitoring solutions where they're watching. It's an agent-based solution on the endpoint where they're watching everything the user does in very secure environments. And that would also tell you. Also, some cases, endpoint protection solutions do show you sort of it's paying attention to whenever something is being run on multiple machines. So if a piece of malware starts on one machine and somehow spreads to a second machine and so on, since they're paying attention to executables that are running, they're able to kind of tell when the ransomware started on machine A and then went to machine B, and they can follow the track as well. So there's a couple other solutions you can look at as well. You've got some options for sure.
All right. Well, thank you again to Nick and Ian for your presentations. Just a reminder, the seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so feel free to come back and review. Check out the ebook, Indications of Compromise, for a deeper dive in today's topic, or go to solarwindsmsp.com. And once again, thank you for attending and have a great day.